Hi, my name's Victoria, and on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my sister Natasha stood up during our wedding reception and announced she was pregnant with twins. The room erupted in cheers. My husband James looked confused, and I just smiled and clapped along like everyone else. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just kept smiling while my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But what really destroyed me was 30 minutes later, when Dr. Martinez walked through those reception hall doors with test results in her hand and one brutal truth that changed everything forever. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. So let me ask you, if someone you trusted completely hijacked the most important moment of your life with a lie, would you have stayed silent? Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what would you have done in my position? Let's talk. The morning started like something out of a fairy tale. I woke up in the bridal suite at the Grandview Manor, sunlight streaming through the tall windows overlooking the gardens where I'd be saying my vows in just 8 hours. My bridesmaids were already bustling around, steam rising from coffee cups and curling irons heating up on every available surface. The air smelled like vanilla candles and that expensive perfume my maid of honor Emma had splurged on for the occasion. I should have been nervous. Most brides are nervous on their wedding day, right? But I wasn't. James and I had been together for 4 years, engaged for 18 months, and I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. We'd planned every detail together, from the ivory roses in my bouquet to the playlist for our first dance. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of the life we'd dreamed about since our second date, when he told me he wanted to grow old on a porch somewhere, holding my hand. Natasha arrived at the bridal suite around 10 in the morning, carrying a garment bag and wearing this huge smile that seemed almost too bright. She was 2 years younger than me, 26 to my 28, but she'd always carried herself like she was the older sister. Confident, dramatic, always the center of attention wherever we went. Growing up, I was the quiet one who got good grades and helped Mom with the grocery shopping, while Natasha was the one who got lead roles in school plays and had boys calling our house every night. "Vic!" she squealed, setting down her things and pulling me into one of those theatrical hugs she was famous for. "You look absolutely radiant already and you're not even dressed yet." Her voice had that sing-song quality it got when she was excited about something, or when she wanted something. I couldn't tell which one it was that morning, but I was too happy to care. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of hairspray, lipstick touch-ups, and Emma making sure everyone had eaten something substantial before the ceremony. My mom fluttered in and out, checking on flowers and making sure the photographers were getting good shots of the getting ready process. Dad poked his head in once to tell me how beautiful I looked, his eyes getting misty before he quickly retreated, to avoid ruining his composure. But through it all, I kept noticing these little moments with Natasha. She'd catch her reflection in the mirror and place her hand on her stomach, just for a second, when she thought no one was looking. She asked Emma if there was any ginger tea available, claiming her stomach felt a little off. When Mom brought in a tray of mimosas for toasts, Natasha wrinkled her nose and said she wasn't really in the mood for alcohol today. At the time, I thought maybe she was just tired. She'd been working crazy hours at her marketing firm, pulling all-nighters for some big campaign launch. Or maybe she was coming down with something and didn't want to get me sick on my wedding day. I was touched by how considerate she was being, making sure not to drink or do anything that might affect her health, and, by extension, my perfect day. The ceremony itself was everything James and I had dreamed it would be. The weather was perfect. 72 degrees with just enough breeze to keep my veil flowing dramatically as I walked down the aisle. Dad managed to keep it together until he placed my hand in James's, and then he whispered something about how proud Mom would have been, if she were still alive. My grandmother's pearl necklace felt warm against my throat, and the ivory roses in my bouquet smelled like the garden where James first told me he loved me. When the minister asked if anyone had any reason why we shouldn't be wed, there was that traditional moment of silence. And I remember thinking how grateful I was that this wasn't one of those weddings where someone actually speaks up. James and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to be each other's best friend, biggest supporter and partner in all the adventures yet to come. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands were shaking just enough that I could feel how nervous he actually was underneath that calm exterior. The kiss that sealed our marriage lasted maybe 3 seconds longer than it should have, but the crowd loved it. Everyone cheered, rice flew through the air despite our requests for biodegradable confetti, and Emma immediately started crying and ruining her mascara. As we walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, I caught Natasha's eye in the third row. She was clapping and smiling, but there was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. Something that looked almost like she was calculating something. The cocktail hour went smoothly. Guests mingled on the terrace, sipping signature drinks James and I had named after our dogs, and the photographer captured those golden hour shots that would look perfect in our wedding album. I changed into my reception dress, something shorter and easier to dance in, while James loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. We were both glowing with that special kind of happiness that comes from knowing you've just made the best decision of your entire life. Dinner was served at 7:30, and everything was perfect. The chicken was moist, the wine was flowing, and Uncle Robert hadn't said anything inappropriate yet, which we were counting as a major victory. James's best man gave a toast that was funny without being embarrassing, and Emma's maid of honor speech made everyone cry in the best possible way. The evening felt magical, like we were living inside one of those romantic movies where everything goes exactly according to plan. That's when Natasha asked for the microphone. She stood up at the head table, her champagne glass untouched beside. Her plate and that too bright smile was back. The room gradually quieted as people realized someone was about to speak. I assumed she wanted to give a sister of the bride toast, something sweet about growing up together and how happy she was for James and me. I was actually looking forward to it, imagining the heartfelt words she'd share about our relationship and how she'd watched our love story unfold. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I didn't want to take attention away from Victoria and James's special day, but I just can't keep this secret any longer. She placed both hands on her stomach in a gesture that suddenly made all those little moments from the morning click into place. "I'm pregnant! With twins!" The room exploded. Chairs scraped against the floor as people jumped up to congratulate her. Aunt Linda started crying tears of joy. Cousin Michael started shouting about how there would be 2 new babies to spoil. Even some of James's relatives, who barely knew Natasha, were raising their glasses and cheering. I sat frozen in my chair, my face locked in what I hoped looked like a happy, surprised expression. James reached for my hand under the table, his grip tight and confused. This was our wedding reception. Our moment. The day we'd planned and saved for and dreamed about for over a year. And suddenly, it wasn't about us anymore. But I didn't stand up and scream. I didn't grab the microphone and tell everyone that this wasn't the time or place for personal announcements. I didn't point out that she'd just turned our wedding reception into her pregnancy reveal party. I just kept smiling and clapping, because that's what you do when you're raised to be polite, to keep the peace, to never make a scene. Inside, though, I was dying. This was supposed to be our night, the celebration of the beginning of our marriage, and now everyone was talking about baby names and due dates and nursery themes. The photographer had abandoned our table and was snapping pictures of Natasha accepting congratulations. Even the band seemed confused about whether they should continue with our planned reception timeline or pause for this unexpected family celebration. What I didn't know, what none of us knew as we sat there watching my sister bask in the attention she'd stolen from my wedding day, was that 30 minutes later, Dr. Martinez would walk through those reception hall doors with a manila envelope in her hand. Inside that envelope were test results that would prove beyond any doubt that my sister wasn't pregnant at all, not with twins, not with anything. And when that moment came, when the truth finally emerged in front of our entire family and all our friends, everything I thought I knew about my sister, about loyalty, about the length some people will go to for attention, would change forever. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs earlier. Natasha and I weren't just sisters. We were best friends who shared everything. Growing up in our small house on Maple Street, we shared a bedroom until I was 16, whispering secrets under matching floral comforters that Mom had bought on clearance at JCPenney. We painted each other's nails every Sunday night while watching romantic comedies on the old television Dad had moved up to our room when he upgraded the living room set. She was the one who held my hair back when I got food poisoning from that sketchy seafood restaurant on my 18th birthday. I was the one who drove to her college dorm at 2 a.m. when her boyfriend Derek broke up with her via text message, bringing a bag of chocolate chip cookies and staying up until sunrise, while she cried and planned elaborate revenge scenarios she'd never actually execute. When she graduated and moved back home to look for work, we fell right back into our old patterns of late-night conversations and shared inside jokes that made our parents roll their eyes. Natasha was always the dramatic one, the sister who could cry on command and somehow make every story about herself. But it never bothered me much. That was just who she was. When we were kids, she'd fake stomach aches to get out of math tests and somehow convince Mom that she was genuinely sick, even though she'd been perfectly fine at breakfast. She once pretended to sprain her ankle during PE class because she hadn't, studied for her history exam and needed an excuse to go to the nurse's office instead. But those were harmless little lies, the kind of white lies every kid tells. She wasn't malicious about it, just creative in avoiding consequences. I actually admired her ability to think on her feet and talk her way out of trouble. While I was the type to confess immediately if I broke something or forgot an assignment, Natasha could spin elaborate stories that somehow made her look like the victim of circumstances rather than the person responsible. In high school, she convinced our parents that she needed to quit her part-time job at the ice cream shop because her manager was being inappropriate, when really she just wanted more time to hang out with her friends. She told them that her chemistry teacher had it out for her when she was failing the class, rather than admitting she'd stopped doing homework weeks earlier. But again, these felt like normal teenage behaviors, not signs of some deeper character flaw. The lies got more sophisticated as we got older, but they were usually harmless. She'd tell Mom she was studying at the library when she was actually at her boyfriend's apartment. She'd claim she was sick and couldn't make it to family dinner when she'd actually made plans with friends. Nothing that hurt anyone, just little deceptions to make her life easier or more convenient. When she started dating Marcus 2 years ago, I thought she'd finally found someone who balanced out her dramatic tendencies. He was steady, reliable, the kind of guy who showed up when he said he would and didn't play emotional games. He was an accountant who wore button-down shirts even on weekends and had strong opinions about retirement savings strategies. I liked him immediately, not because he was exciting, but because he seemed to genuinely care about my sister and wasn't fazed by her flair for theatrics. Natasha seemed happy with Marcus, happier than I'd seen her in any previous relationship. She stopped creating drama where none existed and started talking about the future in concrete terms rather than vague fantasies. They moved in together after 8 months, and Natasha actually seemed to enjoy the domestic routine of grocery shopping together and splitting household chores. She'd send me photos of meals she'd cooked, looking proud of her growing collection of kitchen gadgets and recipe books. But sometime around last Christmas, things started to shift. Marcus began making comments about timelines, about where he saw their relationship heading in the next few years. He'd mention engagement rings during conversations about other couples' weddings, or make jokes about how many kids they might want someday. Nothing pushy, just the natural progression of a serious relationship between two people in their late 20s. Natasha's response to these conversations was always enthusiastic in the moment, but she'd call me later expressing doubts. She wasn't sure if Marcus was the one, or if she was just settling because he was a good guy who treated her well. She wondered if she was missing out on some grand passion, some epic love story that would sweep her off her feet like the ones we'd watched in all those romantic movies growing up. I tried to be supportive while also being realistic. I reminded her that real love wasn't always fireworks and dramatic gestures, that sometimes the best relationships were built on friendship, trust, and genuine compatibility. James and I hadn't had a whirlwind romance either, but our love had grown deeper and stronger over time, building a foundation that could weather any storm. But Natasha seemed restless, like she was searching for something to make her feel special, to make her life feel as exciting as she thought it should be. She started following lifestyle influencers on social media, women who documented their picture-perfect lives with designer handbags and exotic vacations. She'd show me posts about engagement parties at expensive restaurants and baby showers with elaborate themes, sighing about how some people seem to have everything figured out. When James proposed to me last spring, Natasha was genuinely excited and threw herself into wedding planning with an enthusiasm that touched my heart. She helped me research venues, spent hours scrolling through Pinterest boards of bouquet ideas, and even offered to handle the coordination with our caterer when I got overwhelmed with work deadlines. She seemed thrilled to be part of the process, asking detailed questions about every decision and offering opinions on everything from invitation fonts to centerpiece options. But as the wedding date got closer, I started noticing subtle changes in her behavior. She'd make comments about how expensive everything was, how much stress I was putting myself through for one day. She'd point out flaws in our plans that I hadn't even considered, like how the outdoor ceremony might be ruined by rain, or how some of our older relatives might have trouble hearing the music from the back rows. When Marcus didn't propose during their 2-year anniversary dinner last month, Natasha seemed devastated in a way that surprised me. She'd been with him longer than James and I had been together when we got engaged, but Marcus was more traditional and wanted to have certain financial milestones in place before taking that step. He'd explained this to her clearly, and she'd seemed to understand and agree with his reasoning. But after that anniversary passed without a ring, Natasha started making weird comments about timelines and biological clocks. She'd mentioned how some of her college friends were already married with children, how she was tired of being the only single person at parties and work events. When I pointed out that she wasn't actually single, she'd brush off my comment and change the subject. The week before my wedding, she seemed particularly on edge. She was snapping at Mom over minor details about her bridesmaid duties, complaining that her dress didn't fit right, even though we'd had it professionally altered twice. She kept asking if there would be opportunities for her to give a speech at the reception, suggesting different moments when she might address the crowd. I assumed she was just feeling overwhelmed by all the wedding activities and maybe a little emotional about watching her big sister get married. I tried to include her in as many decisions as possible, asking for her input on last-minute details and making sure she felt valued as my maid of honor. I wanted her to feel special and important, to know that her role in my wedding was meaningful. To me. What I didn't realize was that she was planning her own moment, her own announcement that would shift all the attention to her. While I was focused on making sure our day went smoothly, she was apparently plotting how to make herself the center of everyone's attention and conversation. The morning of the wedding, when she kept placing her hand on her stomach and declining alcohol, I thought she was just being extra cautious about staying healthy for the big day. When she asked about ginger tea, I assumed maybe she was feeling nervous about her bridesmaid responsibilities. All those little signs that seemed so obvious in retrospect were completely invisible to me at the time, because I trusted her completely and would never have imagined she was capable of what she was planning. The warning signs had been accumulating for months, but I was too caught up in wedding planning and my own happiness to connect the dots. 3 weeks before my wedding, Natasha started making strange comments during our regular sister coffee dates at Brew and Bean. the little cafe downtown where we'd been meeting every Saturday morning for the past 2 years. She'd order her usual vanilla latte with extra foam, but then push it around the table without really drinking it. "You know, Vic," she said one particularly gray October morning, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly while staring out the window, "sometimes I wonder if Marcus and I are moving too slowly. Like, what if I'm wasting my prime years waiting for him to be ready for the next step?" Her voice had this wistful quality that I'd been hearing more often lately, like she was narrating her own tragic love story rather than talking about her actual relationship. I set down my black coffee and studied her face. "Has something happened? Did you two have a fight or something?" Marcus had always seemed devoted to her, the kind of boyfriend who remembered to bring her soup when she was sick and never forgot important dates. If there were problems in their relationship, she hadn't mentioned them before. "No, nothing specific," she sighed, finally taking a small sip of her latte. "It's just that everyone around me is hitting these major life milestones, and I feel like I'm standing still. Sarah from work just had her baby shower last weekend, and it was so beautiful. All those tiny clothes and everyone celebrating this new life that's coming. And here I am, 26 years old, and what do I have to show for it?" This conversation struck me as odd because Natasha had never expressed interest in having children anytime soon. In fact, when Marcus had mentioned wanting kids during a double date a few months earlier, she'd laughed and said she could barely keep a houseplant alive. She'd always been focused on her career, talking about promotions and networking events, not nurseries and baby names. "Tash, you have a great job, a boyfriend who adores you, and you're still young," I reminded her, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "There's no timeline you have to follow. You and Marcus will figure out your next steps when you're both ready." She nodded, but I could tell my words weren't really reaching her. I guess I just thought by now I'd have something more concrete to point to. Something that showed I was really growing up, you know? Sometimes I feel like I'm still the same person I was in college, just with a better apartment and a 401k. That conversation stuck with me because it felt so unlike the Natasha I knew. She'd always been confident about her choices, never one to compare her life to others or worry about meeting societal expectations. But lately, she seemed fixated on what other people were doing, constantly mentioning friends who'd gotten engaged or promoted or pregnant, as if she was keeping score of some game I didn't understand. 2 weeks before the wedding, the comments got more specific. We were addressing invitations at my kitchen table, a tedious task that required careful handwriting and multiple stamps per envelope. Natasha was helping me stuff the inner envelopes while I worked on the outer addressing, and we'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm of assembly line efficiency. "You know what's funny?" she said suddenly, looking up from a stack of RSVP cards. "I was talking to Aunt Linda yesterday, and she mentioned how she was surprised I wasn't married yet since I'm the one who always dated more in high school." She laughed, but it sounded forced. I told her that some people just move at different paces, but honestly, it made me think. I looked up from the envelope I was addressing to James's college roommate. Think about what? About how people perceive me, I guess. Like, am I the sister who has her life together, or am I the one who's still figuring things out while her younger sister gets married first? She was still smiling, but there was something sharp in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Natasha, you're only 2 years older than me, and besides, there's no rule about birth order and marriage," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "You'll get married when you're ready to get married. There's no rush." I know, she said quickly, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm just being silly. It's probably just all this wedding stuff making me emotional." She went back to stuffing envelopes, but I noticed she was being more aggressive with the task, shoving the cards into the envelopes with unnecessary force. The week of the wedding, her behavior became even more erratic. She'd call me multiple times a day with questions about bridesmaid duties that we'd already discussed, or suggestions for last-minute changes that would have been impossible to implement. She wanted to know if there would be time for her to give a speech during the reception, even though we'd already finalized the timeline with our wedding coordinator. "I just think it would be nice if the maid of honor said something," she explained during one of these calls. "Emma's giving a speech as your best friend, but I'm your sister. Shouldn't that relationship get acknowledged somehow?" I was touched by her desire to speak about our relationship, so I talked to our coordinator about possibly fitting in a brief sister of the bride moment during dinner. But when I called Natasha back to tell her we could work something in, she seemed oddly evasive about what she wanted to say. "Oh, just something about growing up together and how happy I am for you and James," she said vaguely. "I'll figure it out when the moment feels right." The Tuesday before the wedding, she showed up at my apartment unannounced with a bag of takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. This wasn't unusual. She'd been doing surprise sister dinners throughout our entire engagement. But something felt different about her energy that night. She seemed restless, unable to sit still, constantly getting up to look out the window or refill her wine glass. "Are you nervous about Saturday?" I asked as we sat on my couch sharing lo mein straight from the container. James was at his bachelor party, so it was just the two of us in my quiet apartment. "Nervous? No, why would I be nervous?" Her response came too quickly, too defensively. "I mean, I'm not the one getting married. I just meant about the bridesmaid stuff, making sure everything goes smoothly," I clarified. "You've seemed a little on edge lately." She was quiet for a long moment, twirling noodles around her chopsticks without bringing them to her mouth. "Can I ask you something, Vic? Do you ever feel like life is just happening to you instead of you making choices about your life?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Like, you and James fell in love, so you're getting married. It was the natural next step. But what if there was no natural next step? What if you had to create your own moment, your own reason for people to celebrate you?" She finally took a bite of her food, chewing thoughtfully. "I guess I'd focus on celebrating myself instead of waiting for other people to do it," I said, slowly, not entirely sure where this conversation was heading. "There are lots of ways to mark important moments in your life that don't depend on other people." She nodded, but again, I could tell my answer wasn't what she was looking for. "Right, but some moments are just bigger than others, Some announcements carry more weight." That night, after she left, I found myself replaying our conversation and feeling unsettled. There was something in her tone, something calculating, about the way she'd ask those questions. That didn't sit right with me. But I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, both hers and mine, and tried to focus on the excitement of getting married in just 4 days. The Thursday before the wedding, she texted me a photo of her bridesmaid dress hanging in her closet with the caption, "Ready to celebrate my beautiful sister." But when I looked closely at the image, I noticed she'd also photographed a pregnancy test box on her dresser in the background. At the time, I assumed it belonged to her roommate Jessica, who'd been dating someone seriously for a while. Friday night, at our rehearsal dinner, Natasha seemed more like herself again. She was charming and funny, telling embarrassing stories about our childhood that had everyone laughing. She toasted James and me with a glass of champagne, saying all the right things about love and family and new beginnings. I felt relieved that whatever weird mood she'd been in seemed to have passed. But now, sitting at our reception table while she stood at the front of the room with her hands on her stomach, announcing her fake pregnancy to our entire wedding reception, all those strange conversations and odd behaviors suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't been nervous about my wedding or feeling left behind in her relationship with Marcus. She'd been planning this moment, this announcement that would steal the spotlight from my marriage and make her the center of attention instead. The worst part was realizing that she'd been calculating this betrayal for weeks, maybe even months, while I'd been confiding in her about wedding stress and including her in every important decision. While I'd been worried about her feelings and trying to make sure she felt valued and important, she'd been plotting how to sabotage the most important day of my life. The moment Natasha made her announcement, the entire energy of my wedding reception shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The carefully orchestrated timeline James and I had spent months planning became irrelevant as our guests abandoned their dinner plates and surrounded my sister with congratulations and questions about due dates and baby names. The band, clearly, confused about whether to continue with our planned program, awkwardly transitioned into background music while everyone focused on the unexpected pregnancy reveal. I remained seated at the head table, my face frozen in what I hoped looked like surprised joy rather than the complete devastation I actually felt. James's hand found mine under the white linen tablecloth, his grip tight and warm, anchoring me to reality as I watched my wedding reception transform into my sister's baby shower. His thumb traced small circles on my palm, a gesture that had comforted me through countless stressful moments over the past 4 years. But even that familiar touch couldn't ease the hollow ache spreading through my chest. "Victoria, did you know?" asked my Aunt Linda, appearing at my elbow with tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "Oh my goodness, this is such wonderful news! Twins! Can you imagine?" She was practically vibrating with excitement, her voice pitched high with the kind of genuine happiness that made my forced smile feel even more dishonest. I shook my head, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. The truth was, I hadn't known because there was nothing to know. Every instinct I had as Natasha's sister was screaming that something about this announcement felt wrong, but I couldn't exactly voice those suspicions at my own wedding reception, without looking like a jealous, attention-seeking bride. Marcus appeared at Natasha's side, looking as shocked as I felt but trying to play the part of the thrilled, expectant father. He wrapped his arm around her waist and accepted handshakes and backslaps from our male relatives, but I caught him stealing confused glances at Natasha when he thought no one was looking. In all the conversations James and I had with them as a couple, Marcus had never mentioned they were trying to have a baby. In fact, just last month he'd been talking about wanting to save for a house before taking any major next steps. The photographer, who had been focused on capturing candid moments of James and me during dinner, immediately redirected her attention to document this unexpected family announcement. I watched through the viewfinder of someone else's phone as she snapped pictures of Natasha glowing with her hands on her stomach, surrounded by our beaming relatives. These photos would end up in our wedding album, permanent documentation of the night my sister hijacked my reception. "How far along are you, sweetheart?" asked my grandmother, reaching up to cup Natasha's face with hands that shook slightly from age and excitement. "When are these precious babies due?" "About 8 weeks," Natasha replied without hesitation, her voice carrying that same theatrical quality I'd noticed during wedding planning. "We just found out for certain this week, and I couldn't keep it secret any longer. I'm sorry if the timing seems strange, but I was just so excited I could burst." 8 weeks pregnant with twins would mean she'd conceived sometime in early September, right around the time she'd started making those weird comments about life timelines and feeling left behind. The timing felt convenient, too perfectly aligned with her recent emotional crisis about not having major life milestones to celebrate. Emma, my best friend and maid of honor, appeared beside me with a concerned expression that told me my poker face wasn't as convincing as I'd hoped. She leaned down to whisper in my ear, "You okay? You look a little pale." I nodded quickly, not wanting to create any additional drama or draw attention away from my sister's moment. The last thing I wanted was for our wedding guests to witness any signs of tension between the bride and her sister, especially not on what was supposed to be the happiest night of our lives. "Just overwhelmed," I murmured back. "It's a lot to process." James stood up from his chair and walked around the table to where Natasha was still accepting congratulations. I watched him pull her into a hug, his face arranged in an expression of surprised happiness that looked much more natural than whatever I was managing. "Congratulations, Tosh," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is incredible news." But when he returned to his seat next to me, he leaned over and spoke quietly into my ear. Did she seem pregnant to you during all the wedding planning? Because I'm trying to remember if there were any signs, and I'm coming up blank." His question validated my own doubts, but I couldn't respond honestly without risking someone overhearing. Instead, I just shrugged and tried to focus on cutting the piece of salmon on my plate that had gone cold while everyone celebrated my sister's announcement. The worst part wasn't even the stolen attention, though that stung more than I wanted to admit. The worst part was watching how naturally the lie seemed to come to her, how effortlessly she fielded questions about morning sickness and prenatal vitamins and nursery plans. She had answers for everything, delivered with just the right amount of glow and excitement to be completely convincing. "We haven't told Marcus's parents yet," she was saying to a cluster of cousins who had gathered around her chair. "We wanted to share the news with our immediate family first, and when better, then at a family celebration." She gestured toward James and me with a smile that looked genuine enough to fool anyone who didn't know her as well as I did. Our cousin Sarah, who had 3 kids of her own, immediately launched into advice about the best OB/GYN practices in the area and recommendations for prenatal yoga classes. Natasha nodded along enthusiastically, taking mental notes about information she would never actually need to use. My mother, who had been circulating among tables to make sure all our guests felt welcomed and appreciated, finally made it over to witness the commotion around Natasha. When she realized what was happening, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy I hadn't seen since my father was still alive. She pulled Natasha into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered something about becoming a grandmother. "Mom didn't know either?" I asked Emma quietly, feeling a small measure of relief that I wasn't the only family member who had been kept in the dark about this supposed pregnancy. "Doesn't look like it," Emma replied, watching my mother dab at her eyes with a cocktail napkin while continuing to beam at Natasha. "Your mom's not exactly great at keeping secrets. If she'd known about twins, she probably would have let something slip during the rehearsal dinner." The band leader approached our table, clearly unsure about how to proceed with the evening's entertainment. We'd planned specific songs for different parts of the reception, including our first dance as husband and wife, but the unexpected baby announcement had thrown off the entire timeline. "Should we hold off on the first dance until things settle down?" he asked James quietly. "Or would you prefer to go ahead and try to redirect everyone's attention back to the wedding celebration?" James looked at me for guidance, but I found myself paralyzed by indecision. Part of me wanted to reclaim our reception, to remind everyone that this was supposed to be about our marriage, not my sister's reproductive plans. But another part of me knew that trying to compete with a pregnancy announcement would make me look petty and selfish, especially since most of our guests genuinely believed they were celebrating wonderful news. "Let's give it a few more minutes," I finally decided. "Maybe people will naturally transition back to the reception activities once the initial excitement dies down." But the excitement wasn't dying down. If anything, it seemed to be building momentum as more relatives called over friends and extended family members to share in the celebration. Someone had started a group text to notify family members who weren't at the wedding, and phones were buzzing with responses and congratulations from people who wouldn't even meet these supposed twins until they were born. Uncle Robert, who had somehow managed not to embarrass himself during dinner, chose this moment to stand up and propose an impromptu toast to the expectant parents. "To Natasha and Marcus," he announced, raising his beer bottle high in the air, "and to the 2 little miracles who will be joining our family soon." The entire room erupted in cheers and applause, with guests raising their glasses of wine and champagne to toast my sister's fake pregnancy at my actual wedding. I lifted my own glass and took a sip of wine that tasted like disappointment and forced politeness, watching my sister bask in attention that should have been focused on James and me. That's when I noticed Dr. Martinez standing in the doorway of the reception hall, still wearing her medical scrubs under a light jacket, scanning the crowd with an expression I couldn't quite read. She had a manila envelope clutched in her right hand, and something about her posture suggested she wasn't here for a social visit. Our eyes met across the room, and she started walking purposefully toward our table, navigating between clusters of guests who were still buzzing with excitement about the pregnancy announcement. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't have explained why. Dr. Martinez had been my physician for 3 years, ever since I'd moved to this area for work, but we'd never socialized outside of medical appointments. The fact that she was here, at my wedding reception, with what looked like official documents, sent a chill of anticipation down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Dr. Martinez moved through the crowd with the kind of determined purpose that made people instinctively step aside. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, but there was something about her presence that commanded attention and respect. I'd always appreciated her no-nonsense approach during my annual checkups and the occasional urgent care visit, but seeing her in this setting, at my wedding reception, filled me with a strange mixture of curiosity and dread. As she approached our head table, conversations around her gradually quieted. Guests who had been celebrating Natasha's pregnancy announcement turned to look at this unexpected visitor in medical scrubs, clearly wondering if there was some kind of emergency that required immediate attention. The festive atmosphere that had filled the room just moments before began to shift into something more tense and uncertain. "Victoria," Dr. Martinez said when she reached our table, her voice professional but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration, but I need to speak with you about a medical matter that requires immediate clarification." My stomach dropped. In all the years I'd been her patient, Dr. Martinez had never contacted me outside of scheduled appointments or routine follow-up calls. The fact that she'd tracked me down at my wedding reception suggested something serious enough to warrant breaking normal protocol. "Is everything okay?" James asked, standing up from his chair with concern written across his face. "Is Victoria hurt? Sick?" "No, nothing like that," Dr. Martinez replied quickly, but her eyes remained fixed on me rather than my new husband. "This concerns some test results that came to my attention this afternoon. Results that I believe may be relevant to your family." I glanced over at Natasha, who had gone very still in her chair, despite the continued congratulations from relatives who hadn't yet noticed the doctor's arrival. Her face had lost some of its glow, and she was staring at Dr. Martinez with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and calculation. "What kind of test results?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The noise level in the reception hall was still high enough that most guests couldn't hear our conversation, but I could feel the attention of our immediate table focusing on this unexpected exchange. Dr. Martinez opened the manila envelope she'd been carrying and pulled out several sheets of paper. "This afternoon, I received a call from LabCorp regarding some unusual activity on one of my patient accounts. It appears that someone has been using your name and insurance information to order pregnancy tests and request medical documentation." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt James's hand on my back, steadying me as the full implications of what she was saying began to sink in. "My name? My insurance?" "Yes. The tests were ordered using your patient ID number and personal information, but the person who came in for testing was not you." Dr. Martinez glanced meaningfully toward Natasha, who had gone completely pale. "The lab flagged it because the physical description of the person tested didn't match your file, and when they called to verify, I realized there had been some kind of fraud." Emma, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, leaned forward in her chair. "Are you saying someone impersonated Victoria to get fake pregnancy test results?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Dr. Martinez confirmed, her voice growing stronger as she laid out the facts. "The person who took these tests is not pregnant. In fact, the blood work shows no signs of pregnancy hormones whatsoever, but someone went to considerable trouble to obtain official-looking documentation that could be used to support a false pregnancy claim." The reception hall around us seemed to fade into background noise as the truth of what had happened became crystal clear. Natasha had used my identity to get fake pregnancy test results, which she could then use to support her announcement. She had committed insurance fraud and identity theft to steal the spotlight from my wedding day. "That's impossible," Natasha said suddenly, her voice shaky but defiant. "There must be some mistake. I went to my own doctor, used my own insurance. This doesn't have anything to do with Victoria." Dr. Martinez turned to face my sister directly, her expression professional but firm. "Ma'am, I have the paperwork right here. The tests were ordered under Victoria Chen's patient account at 2:30 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. The person who provided the blood and urine samples was described as approximately 5'6" with brown hair and brown eyes, which matches you, not my patient who is 5'3" with blonde hair and blue eyes." I felt like I was watching this confrontation from outside my own body. The sister I'd shared a bedroom with for 16 years, who had held my hand during our mother's funeral, who had helped me address wedding invitations just 2 weeks ago, had stolen my identity to fake a pregnancy announcement at my own wedding reception. "Natasha," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the noise around us. "Is this true?" She looked at me with tears starting to form in her eyes, but whether they were from guilt or frustration at being caught, I couldn't tell. "Vic, you don't understand. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." "Then explain it," James said, his tone harder than I'd ever heard it. "Explain why you used my wife's identity to fake pregnancy test results." Marcus, who had been sitting beside Natasha throughout this exchange, turned to stare at his girlfriend with an expression of complete shock. "What is she talking about, Tash? What fake pregnancy tests?" The conversation was no longer quiet enough to escape the notice of nearby guests. Aunt Linda, who had been so excited about the twin announcement just minutes earlier, moved closer to our table with a confused expression. "What's going on? Is there some kind of problem?" Dr. Martinez looked at me for guidance about how to proceed. This was my wedding reception, my family, my decision about whether to expose my sister's lie publicly or handle it privately. But the choice was made for me when Uncle Robert, who had clearly had too much to drink, spoke up loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Are you saying the pregnancy is fake?" he asked, his voice carrying across the reception hall. "That Natasha lied about having twins?" A hush fell over the room as guests turned to stare at our table. The band stopped playing mid-song, and conversations throughout the hall gradually died as people realized something dramatic was unfolding. Natasha sat frozen in her chair, caught between the impossible choice of continuing her lie in front of overwhelming evidence or admitting to the fraud and theft that had enabled her deception. "The test results are very clear," Dr. Martinez said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The person who took these tests is not pregnant. These documents were obtained fraudulently using another person's identity and insurance information." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, the distant hum of the air conditioning system, and the soft clink of silverware as someone set down their fork. Every person in that reception hall was staring at either Natasha or me, waiting to see how this impossible situation would resolve itself. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, before it was shattered by Marcus's voice, barely above a whisper, but audible in the sudden quiet of the reception hall. "Natasha, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me you didn't lie about being pregnant." Natasha's face crumpled as she looked at her boyfriend, then at me, then at the 150 guests who were all staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. Her mouth opened and closed several times without any sound coming out, like she was trying to find words that didn't exist to explain the inexplicable. I can explain," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "This is all just a misunderstanding. The doctor is confused about something." Dr. Martinez held up the test results again, her professional demeanor unwavering despite the obvious discomfort of the situation. "There's no confusion here. These documents clearly show that tests were ordered under Victoria Chen's name and insurance, but the person tested is not pregnant. The fraud is documented and will need to be reported to the appropriate authorities. My grandmother, who had been so excited about becoming a great-grandmother just minutes earlier, slowly sank into a nearby chair. The joy that had lit up her face when Natasha made the announcement was replaced by confusion and disappointment that broke my heart almost as much as my sister's betrayal. "But why?" my mother asked, her voice cracking as she looked between Natasha and me. "Why would you do something like this? And why at Victoria's wedding?" That question hung in the air like a challenge, and I found myself genuinely curious about the answer. What could possibly drive someone to commit identity fraud and steal their sister's medical information just to fake a pregnancy announcement at that sister's wedding reception? Natasha stood up from her chair abruptly, her face flushed with what looked like a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "You all act like I'm some kind of monster, but you don't understand what it's like to be constantly overlooked, constantly pushed to the sidelines while everyone else gets celebrated." The words spilled out of her in a rush, as if a dam had broken. Victoria gets to be the successful one, the one who finds true love, the one who gets the fairy tale wedding. And what do I get? I get to be the bridesmaid, the supporting character. In everyone else's story, James stood up beside me, his jaw tight with anger. "So you decided to commit a crime to steal attention from her wedding day? You think that's justified?" "I wasn't trying to steal anything," Natasha shot back, her voice rising. "I was trying to have one moment where I mattered, where people were happy for me, instead of just politely including me in someone else's celebration." Emma, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, finally spoke up. "Natasha, you could have planned your own celebration. You could have announced a real engagement, a real promotion, a real accomplishment. You didn't have to fake a pregnancy and commit fraud." "With what?" Natasha laughed bitterly. "Marcus won't propose until we have enough money saved for his perfect house and his perfect timeline. My job is fine, but nothing worth celebrating. I don't have anything real to announce, so I had to create something." The admission hit the room like a bomb. She had just confessed in front of our entire wedding reception that she had deliberately planned this deception because she was jealous of my happiness and wanted to create her own moment of celebration through lies and fraud. Marcus stared at his girlfriend with an expression of complete devastation. "So our entire relationship has just been you waiting for me to give you something worth announcing? I'm not enough? What we have isn't real unless it fits your timeline for social media posts." "That's not what I meant," Natasha said quickly, reaching for his arm, but he stepped away from her touch. "Marcus, you know I love you. This doesn't have anything to do with us." "It has everything to do with us," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "You were willing to lie about carrying my children to get attention at your sister's wedding. You used someone else's identity to fake medical documents. How am I supposed to trust anything you've ever told me?" Dr. Martinez cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the legal implications of what had happened. "I'm going to need to file a report with both the insurance company and local authorities about the identity theft and insurance fraud. This isn't something that can be handled informally." The weight of those words seemed to finally sink in for Natasha. This wasn't just embarrassment at a family gathering. She was facing real legal consequences for her actions. Her face went white as she realized that her desperate grab for attention had potentially criminal implications. "Dr. Martinez," I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since this confrontation began. "Could we possibly handle the reporting tomorrow? I'd like to get through the rest of my wedding reception without police involvement, if that's possible." The doctor nodded sympathetically. "Of course, I can file the reports first thing Monday morning. But you should know that this will need to be investigated formally, and there will likely be consequences beyond just embarrassment." Aunt Linda, who had been standing nearby listening to this entire exchange, finally spoke up with tears in her eyes. "Natasha, honey, how could you do this to your sister? On her wedding day? This is supposed to be the happiest day of her life." "Because it's always about Victoria," Natasha exploded, her composure finally cracking completely. "It's always been about Victoria. She's the smart one, the responsible one, the one everyone loves and admires. I'm just the dramatic younger sister who never quite measures up." "You're right," I said quietly, surprising everyone, including myself. "It is always about me today. Because today is my wedding day." This was supposed to be about James and me celebrating our marriage with the people we love most. Instead, you turned it into a showcase for your insecurities and your willingness to commit crimes for attention. The guests who could hear our conversation began murmuring among themselves, some pulling out phones to text family members who weren't at the reception, others simply staring in shocked fascination at the drama unfolding before them. "I think we should all take a step back," my mother said, clearly trying to regain some control over the situation. "This is a family matter that should be discussed privately, not in front of all these guests." But the damage was already done. The fairy tale wedding James and I had planned so carefully had been transformed into a public spectacle of family dysfunction and criminal accusations. Our carefully chosen playlist had been replaced by whispered conversations and uncomfortable stares. The celebration of our new marriage had become a courtroom where my sister was being tried for fraud and betrayal. Natasha looked around the room at all the faces staring at her with disappointment and disgust, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that her desperate bid for attention had backfired spectacularly. Instead of being celebrated, she was being exposed as a liar and a criminal. Instead of stealing my spotlight, she had destroyed any respect or sympathy she might have had from our family and friends. "I'm leaving," she announced suddenly, grabbing her purse from under the table. "I can't stay here and be treated like a criminal by my own family." "You are a criminal," James said bluntly. "You committed identity theft and insurance fraud. The fact that your family doesn't change that." As Natasha stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor of the reception hall, I made a decision that surprised even myself. Instead of chasing after her, or trying to smooth things over like I'd done countless times throughout our lives, I simply watched her go. For the first time in 28 years, I was choosing not to clean up the mess my sister had created. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The reception hall remained eerily quiet as the door slammed shut behind her, leaving behind a room full of guests who were still processing what they'd just witnessed. Uncle Robert was the first to break the silence, muttering something about needing another drink, which seemed to signal to everyone else that they could resume breathing and moving. Dr. Martinez approached me one more time before leaving, her expression sympathetic but professional. "Victoria, I want you to know that I'm truly sorry this happened at your wedding. When the lab called about the discrepancy, I felt I had to address it immediately rather than wait until Monday." "You did the right thing," I assured her, accepting the manila envelope containing all the documentation of Natasha's fraud. "Thank you for coming here personally, instead of just calling the police directly. I'll be in touch early next week about the formal reporting process," she said gently. "Try to enjoy the rest of your wedding celebration. Don't let this ruin what should be a beautiful night." After she left, I stood at the head table holding the envelope that contained proof of my sister's betrayal, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos that had just erupted around me. James moved to my side, wrapping his arm around my waist in a gesture that felt both protective and supportive. "What do you need?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with concern. "Do you want to call it a night? Send everyone home? We can deal with all of this tomorrow." I looked around the reception hall at our friends and family, many of whom were still standing in small clusters whispering about what they'd witnessed. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared fascinated by the drama, and a few seemed genuinely concerned about how James and I were handling the situation. "No," I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "This is our wedding reception. We planned this celebration for months, and I'm not going to let my sister's lies ruin it completely." Emma appeared beside us, having apparently been listening to our conversation. What can we do to help? Should we make some kind of announcement? To the guests? Try to redirect everyone's attention back to celebrating your marriage? Before I could answer, Marcus walked over to our table, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. Victoria, James, I am so incredibly sorry about what just happened. I had no idea Natasha was capable of something like this. I feel like I should have seen the signs, should have known something was wrong. Marcus, this isn't your fault. I told him honestly. None of us saw this coming. Natasha made her own choices, and the consequences are hers to deal with. I don't even know what to think about our relationship now, he admitted, running his hands through his hair. How do you move forward with someone after discovering they're capable of lying about something this significant? And the identity, theft, the fraud, I feel like I don't even know who she really is. James squeezed my hand before addressing Marcus directly. You don't have to figure that out tonight. Right now, why don't you stay and have a drink with us? You're welcome here regardless of what happens between you and Natasha. Our wedding coordinator, a professional woman named Sarah who had handled dozens of receptions, approached our group with the kind of calm efficiency that made me grateful we'd hired her. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've seen everything from family fights to food poisoning outbreaks. If you'd like to continue with the reception, I can help redirect everyone's focus back to celebrating your marriage. How would you do that? I asked, genuinely curious about her professional perspective on salvaging a wedding reception after such dramatic family upheaval. Well, we could start with your first dance, she suggested. Nothing refocuses a wedding reception quite like watching the bride and groom have their romantic moment. It reminds everyone why we're all here in the first place. I considered her suggestion, thinking about the song James and I had chosen months ago for our first dance. It was At Last by Etta James, a classic that felt both timeless and deeply personal to us. We'd practiced the basic steps in my living room, laughing at our mistakes and spinning around my coffee table until we felt confident enough to perform in front of our loved ones. You know what? I said, feeling a spark of determination. Let's do it. Let's have our first dance and remind everyone that this night is about love and commitment, not lies and drama. Sarah smiled broadly and headed toward the band to coordinate the transition. James turned to face me fully, his hands on my shoulders as he studied my expression carefully. Are you sure about this? He asked. I don't want you to feel like you have to put on a brave face if you're not ready. We can take as much time as you need to process what just happened. I'm not putting on a brave face, I realized as I said it. I'm actually okay. Hurt and disappointed, yes, but also relieved that the truth finally came out. I'd rather deal with reality than live with lies, even if reality is messier and more painful. Sarah returned to our table with a thumbs up from the band leader. Whenever you're ready, they'll start playing your song. I've also asked them to make a brief announcement encouraging everyone to gather around the dance floor for the bride and groom's first dance. Emma gave me a quick hug before stepping back. You're handling this with so much grace, Vic. I'm proud of you for not letting her chaos ruin your night. As James and I walked hand in hand toward the center of the dance floor, I noticed that our guests were indeed gathering around us, their expressions shifting from the confusion and discomfort of the earlier confrontation to something more like anticipation and warmth. The band leader made the announcement Sarah had requested, and the opening notes of At Last began to fill the reception hall. James pulled me into his arms, and as we began to dance, I felt some of the tension from the past hour start to melt away. This was what our wedding reception was supposed to feel like, this connection between us, this celebration of our commitment to each other. The drama with Natasha had been a painful interruption, but it didn't have to define our entire evening. I love you, James whispered in my ear as we swayed to the music. I love how you handled that situation with dignity, even when your sister was falling apart. I love that you chose to continue our celebration instead of letting her chaos win. I love you too, I whispered back, meaning it more deeply than I ever had before. Thank you for standing beside me through all of that, for protecting me without trying to solve everything for me. As the song continued, other couples began joining us on the dance floor. My parents, James's parents, Emma and her boyfriend, even Uncle Robert with his wife. The reception hall gradually filled with the sight of people dancing and the sound of conversations returning to normal wedding topics, like how beautiful the ceremony had been and how delicious the dinner was. Marcus remained at our table, nursing a beer and checking his phone periodically, probably hoping for some kind of message from Natasha that would help him make sense of what had happened. But she didn't return, and as the evening progressed, it became clear that she wasn't planning to come back and apologize or try to explain herself further. When our first dance ended, the band seamlessly transitioned into more upbeat music, and the dance floor stayed crowded with guests who seemed determined to help us salvage our wedding celebration. The photographer resumed taking pictures, focusing on candid shots of people laughing and dancing rather than the documentation of family drama that had dominated the earlier part of the evening. The next morning, I woke up in our honeymoon suite, at the Grandview Manor with a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting soft patterns across the hardwood floor where my wedding dress hung carefully on a padded hanger. James was still sleeping. Beside me, his face peaceful in the early morning light, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my phone. I had turned my phone off after our last dance the night before, wanting to end our wedding celebration on our own terms, rather than dealing with the inevitable flood of messages and calls that would follow Natasha's dramatic exit. But now, sitting, in the quiet of the morning after, I knew I couldn't avoid reality forever. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, 12 voicemails. Most of the calls were from my mother, with a few from various aunts, cousins, and family friends, who had witnessed the confrontation at our reception. There were also 3 calls from numbers I didn't recognize, which probably meant word had already spread beyond our immediate circle of wedding guests. I started with the text messages, figuring they would give me the quickest overview of how people were processing what had happened. My mother's messages were a mixture of frantic worry and attempted damage control. Sweetheart, please call me when you get this. We need to talk about what happened with Natasha. I'm so sorry your wedding got disrupted like that. Your father and I are devastated. Natasha isn't answering her phone either. Do you know where she went after she left? Emma had sent several messages throughout the night. You handled that with so much grace. I'm proud of you. The rest of the reception was beautiful. Don't let her drama overshadow how perfect your day was. Call me when you're ready to talk. I'm here for whatever you need. There were supportive messages from several cousins who had witnessed the confrontation, most expressing shock at Natasha's behavior and admiration for how James and I had handled the situation. But there were also a few messages that made me realize not everyone saw things the same way. My Aunt Carol had written, "Family business should stay private. Maybe you both could have handled this differently." Another cousin suggested that I should reach out to Natasha and try to work things out before they get worse. The voicemails were harder to listen to. My mother's voice was strained and tired. Victoria, honey, I know you're probably upset about what happened, but Natasha is still your sister. She made a terrible mistake, but she's family. Please call me so we can figure out how to fix this. There was a voicemail from Natasha herself, recorded at 2:17 a.m. Vic, I know you probably hate me right now, and maybe you should. I messed up badly, and I know sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. But I need you to know that I never meant for things to go that far. I felt so invisible, and I made a stupid, desperate choice. Please don't let this destroy our family. The last voicemail was from Marcus, his voice hollow and confused. Victoria, I wanted you to know that I broke up with Natasha last night. I can't be with someone who would do what she did, especially to you. I'm so sorry this happened at your wedding. You and James deserve better." James stirred beside me as I set my phone down on the nightstand, his eyes opening slowly as he adjusted to the morning light. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," he said with a sleepy smile, using my new married name for the first time. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, actually," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "But reality is starting to sink in. We have quite a mess to deal with." He sat up in bed, immediately alert. "What kind of mess? More drama from last night?" I filled him in on the messages and calls, watching his expression grow more serious as I described the various reactions from family members. When I told him about Marcus's voicemail, he nodded grimly. "I can't say I'm surprised about the breakup," James said. "What Natasha did wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was premeditated fraud and betrayal. That's not something you come back from easily in a relationship." "The thing that bothers me most," I said, organizing my thoughts as I spoke, "is how many people seem to think this is just normal family drama that we should all sweep under the rug and move on from. Like identity theft and insurance fraud are just quirky sister antics that we should forgive and forget." James reached for my hand, intertwining our fingers. "What do you want to do? How do you want to handle this moving forward?" Before I could answer, there was a soft knock on our suite door. James grabbed a robe and went to answer it while I quickly threw on pajama pants and a t-shirt. Through the doorway, I could hear him talking quietly with someone, though I couldn't make out the words. He returned with a concerned expression and a manila envelope in his hand. "That was a courier. This is addressed to you, marked urgent." Inside the envelope was a formal letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, along with several photocopied documents. The letter was brief and to the point. "Ms. Chen, we represent Ms. Natasha Ryland in connection with recent allegations regarding medical documentation. Our client disputes the characterization of her actions as fraudulent and requests a meeting to resolve this matter privately before formal charges are filed." "She hired a lawyer," I said, reading the letter aloud to James. "She's actually trying to fight this instead of just accepting responsibility for what she did." The accompanying documents appeared to be copies of the fake pregnancy test results, along with what looked like a medical consultation note dated 3 weeks ago. According to this paperwork, Natasha had supposedly received counseling about fertility concerns and been advised to begin prenatal care in preparation for pregnancy. "This is unbelievable," James said, reading over my shoulder. "She's not just refusing to admit she was wrong, she's actually building a defense case. She's claiming she was trying to get pregnant and honestly believed she was pregnant when she made the announcement." I stared at the documents, trying to process the level of deception they represented. This wasn't just a desperate grab for attention that had gotten out of hand. This was a carefully constructed lie with supporting documentation, backup stories, and now legal representation. "You know what this means, don't you?" I said quietly. "This means she's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. All those weird conversations about feeling left behind, all the comments about needing something to celebrate, the questions about the reception timeline. She was setting up her fake pregnancy announcement from the very beginning." My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and I knew I couldn't avoid talking to her forever. "Hi, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, thank goodness you're answering," she said, her relief evident even through the phone. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about what happened last night. This whole situation with Natasha is getting out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, feeling a spark of anger. "Mom, she committed identity theft and insurance fraud. She used my personal information to fake pregnancy test results so she could steal attention from my wedding reception." "How is that getting out of hand?" "It's already completely out of hand." "I know she made a mistake," my mother said carefully, but she's hired a lawyer now, and this is turning into something much bigger than a family disagreement. Maybe we could all sit down together and work something out before this gets to the police and the courts." "A mistake?" I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Mom, this wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated, premeditated crime. She didn't accidentally use my insurance information. She didn't accidentally fake pregnancy test results. She planned this entire thing while I was trusting her to help with my wedding planning." James squeezed my hand supportively as I continued. "And now, instead of apologizing and accepting responsibility, she's hired a lawyer to try to avoid consequences. That tells me everything I need to know about how sorry she actually is." There was a long pause before my mother spoke again. "Victoria, I understand you're hurt and angry. You have every right to be. But she's still your sister, and once this legal mess gets started, there's no going back. Families have been destroyed over less than this." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "Families have been destroyed by enabling behavior like this, by pretending that criminal actions are just family disagreements that we should handle privately. I'm not going to pretend that what she did was okay just to keep the peace." After hanging up with my mother, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the full implications of what I'd just learned. James moved closer to me on the bed, wrapping his arm around my shoulders as I stared at the legal documents spread across the white hotel comforter. "I think I need to call Dr. Martinez," I finally said. "If Natasha is building some kind of defense case, the doctor needs to know what she's dealing with before she files those reports on Monday." Dr. Martinez answered on the second ring, her voice professional but concerned when she heard my name. "Victoria, I was actually planning to call you later today. I've been thinking about the situation from last night, and I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of what we're dealing with legally." "Actually, that's why I'm calling," I said, glancing at the papers scattered around me. "Natasha hired a lawyer overnight, and they sent me documentation claiming she was receiving fertility counseling and honestly believed she was pregnant. I think she's trying to build a case that this was all a misunderstanding rather than deliberate fraud." There was a pause before Dr. Martinez responded, and when she did, her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "That's impossible, and frankly, it makes her actions even more concerning from a legal standpoint. The tests that were ordered under your name weren't fertility consultations or pregnancy confirmations. They were specifically blood and urine tests designed to document current pregnancy hormones for insurance purposes." "What does that mean exactly?" James asked, leaning closer to the phone so he could hear the conversation. "It means that whoever ordered those tests knew exactly what they were requesting and why," Dr. Martinez explained. "These weren't routine checkups or fertility consultations. Someone specifically requested documentation that could be used to support a pregnancy claim for insurance benefits or medical leave purposes. That level of specificity suggests significant premeditation." I felt a chill run down my spine as the full picture became clearer. So she wasn't just faking a pregnancy for attention at my wedding. She was potentially setting up to commit insurance fraud on a much larger scale. "That's certainly a possibility that the authorities will investigate," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "Medical document fraud of this type is often connected to attempts to claim maternity benefits, medical leave, or other insurance-related compensation. The fact that she's now claiming it was an honest mistake actually makes her situation worse, not better." After ending the call with Dr. Martinez, I found myself pacing around our honeymoon suite, too agitated to sit still. The beautiful room that should have been a peaceful retreat after our wedding celebration now felt like a war room, where I was strategizing how to deal with my sister's criminal behavior. "I need to see those fake consultation notes she submitted to her lawyer," I told James. "Something about this whole thing feels even more calculated than we originally thought." James was already on his laptop, researching the law firm that had sent the letter. According to their website, this firm specializes in white-collar criminal defense and insurance litigation. This isn't just any lawyer, Victoria. She hired someone who specifically deals with fraud cases. That information hit me like a physical blow. Natasha hadn't just panicked and called the first attorney she could find. She had specifically sought out a lawyer who specialized in exactly the type of crime she had committed. That level of strategic thinking suggested she had known all along that her actions were criminal and had been preparing for the possibility of getting caught. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Natasha. I know. You're probably not ready to talk to me directly, but I need you to understand that this whole situation has spiraled way beyond what I intended. I made a stupid mistake, but I never meant to hurt you or break any laws. Please don't let them destroy my life over one bad decision." I showed the message to James, who frowned as he read it. She's still trying to minimize what she did, calling it one bad decision instead of acknowledging the weeks of planning and multiple criminal acts involved. Before I could respond to Natasha's text, my phone rang again. This time it was Emma, calling from her apartment where she was apparently fielding calls from other wedding guests who had questions about what they'd witnessed the night before. "Vic, I'm so sorry to bother you on your first day as a married woman, but I've gotten calls from at least 6 people asking if they should give statements to police or something," Emma said. "Apparently word is spreading that there might be criminal charges, and people who were at the reception are wondering if they'll be called as witnesses." "Witnesses to what exactly?" I asked, though I was starting to suspect I knew the answer. 2. The pregnancy announcement and the confrontation with Dr. Martinez, Emma explained. "A couple of people recorded parts of it on their phones, thinking it was just exciting family news, and now they're asking if that footage might be evidence in a fraud case." The idea that our wedding guests had unknowingly documented my sister's criminal confession on their phones felt surreal. What should have been candid videos of a joyful family celebration had instead become potential evidence in a legal case. "Tell everyone to hold on to any photos or videos they took, but they don't need to do anything else unless they're specifically contacted by authorities," I advised Emma. "And thank you for fielding those calls. I'm not ready to deal with that level of logistics yet." After hanging up with Emma, I realized I needed to make a decision about how to proceed. I could continue trying to handle this privately as my mother wanted, potentially allowing Natasha to escape serious consequences for her actions. Or I could fully cooperate with the legal investigation and let the criminal justice system hold her accountable for identity theft and fraud. James sat down beside me on the bed, taking my hands in his. "Whatever you decide, I'm behind you completely. But I want you to think about what kind of precedent this sets, not just for your relationship with Natasha, but for how she treats other people in the future." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where he was going with this. "I mean that if she's willing to commit identity theft against her own sister, and if she faces no real consequences for it, what's to stop her from doing something similar to other people? To Marcus? To your parents? To anyone else who has something she wants or needs?" His words crystallized something I'd been struggling to articulate. This wasn't just about my hurt feelings or our family dynamics. It was about whether Natasha would learn that her actions have consequences, or whether she would continue escalating her deceptive behavior because she'd gotten away with it before. "You're right," I said, feeling a sense of clarity settle over me. "If I don't hold her accountable for this, I'm essentially enabling her to hurt other people the same way she hurt me." I picked up my phone and called Dr. Martinez back. "Doctor, this is Victoria again. I want to make sure you file all the necessary reports first thing Monday morning. I won't be participating in any private mediation or family meetings to resolve this quietly." "I think that's the right decision," Dr. Martinez said. "I'll also be providing the authorities with all the documentation about how the tests were ordered and the specific nature of the fraud involved." Next, I called the law firm that had sent the letter demanding a private meeting. When the receptionist answered, I asked to speak with the attorney representing Natasha. "This is Victoria Chen," I told the lawyer when he came on the line. "I received your letter this morning, and I wanted to let you know that I won't be participating in any private mediation. Your client committed identity theft and insurance fraud, and I intend to cooperate fully with any criminal investigation." There was a pause before the lawyer responded. "Ms. Chen, I understand you're upset, but pursuing criminal charges against a family member over what amounts to a misunderstanding could have serious consequences for everyone involved." "The only misunderstanding here," I replied firmly, "is your client's belief that she could commit crimes against her own sister without facing consequences. I suggest you prepare for a criminal defense rather than trying to negotiate a family settlement." After ending that call, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For the first time since Natasha's announcement at our wedding reception, I felt like I was taking control of the situation rather than just reacting to her chaos. What I hadn't expected was how quickly word would spread throughout our extended family and social circles. By Sunday afternoon, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months, all wanting to know if the rumors they'd heard about my sister's wedding drama were actually true. My cousin Sarah, who lived 3 states away and hadn't even attended the wedding, called with barely contained excitement in her voice. "Vic, I just heard the craziest story from Aunt Linda about Natasha faking a pregnancy at your wedding. Please tell me that's not actually what happened." The tone of her voice made it clear she was hoping for gossip rather than offering genuine support, and I found myself getting irritated by the entertainment value people seemed to be finding in my family's crisis. "It's a private family matter. Sarah, I'd rather not discuss the details." "But is it true about the identity theft?" she pressed. Because Mom said Linda told her that there might be criminal charges, and honestly, I never would have thought Natasha was capable of something like that. After ending that call, I realized I needed to get ahead of the narrative before it got completely distorted through multiple retellings. The last thing I wanted was for this situation to become neighborhood gossip or social media drama that followed our family for years. James suggested we draft a brief statement that we could send to close family members, something factual but not sensational that would satisfy people's curiosity without feeding into the drama. We spent an hour crafting a message that felt appropriate. As many of you witnessed at our wedding reception, there was an incident involving fraudulent medical documentation that we are addressing through proper legal channels. We appreciate your concern and support, but we won't be discussing details publicly while the matter is being investigated. The response to our statement was revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Some family members replied with messages of support and understanding, expressing shock at Natasha's behavior and admiration for how we were handling the situation. But others seemed frustrated by our refusal to provide more details or engage in speculation about Natasha's motivations. My Aunt Carol called within an hour of receiving our message, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Victoria, I think you're making this much bigger than it needs to be. Family problems should be handled within the family, not by involving lawyers and police officers." "Aunt Carol, identity theft and insurance fraud aren't family problems," I replied, feeling my patience wearing thin. "They're crimes. If someone outside our family had done this to me, you wouldn't suggest handling it privately." "But this is different," she insisted. "Natasha is your sister. She made a mistake, but destroying her life over it won't undo what happened or make you feel better." "Nobody is destroying her life," I said firmly. "She made choices that have consequences, and she's facing those consequences. That's how accountability works." What bothered me most about these conversations was the underlying assumption that I should prioritize family loyalty over my own sense of justice and security. Multiple relatives seemed to believe that because Natasha was my sister, I owed her protection from the natural consequences of her criminal behavior. Monday morning brought a call from Detective Rodriguez with the local police department's financial crimes unit. Her voice was professional but warm as she introduced herself and explained that Dr. Martinez had filed the initial report, triggering an official investigation into the identity theft and insurance fraud allegations. "Ms. Chen, I know this is probably a difficult situation since the alleged perpetrator is a family member, Detective Rodriguez said. But I want you to know that we take these types of crimes very seriously, regardless of the relationship between the victim and the suspect. She explained that the investigation would involve reviewing all the fraudulent documentation, interviewing witnesses from the wedding reception, and potentially examining Natasha's financial records to determine if this was part of a larger pattern of fraudulent activity. Will I need to testify or give a formal statement? I asked, realizing that cooperating with the investigation would mean potentially sending my own sister to jail. Most likely, yes, Detective Rodriguez confirmed. Your testimony about the unauthorized use of your identity and insurance information will be crucial to building the case, but we'll work with you to make the process as straightforward as possible. After ending the call with the detective, I found myself experiencing a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the legal system was taking this seriously, and that I wouldn't have to fight for accountability on my own. But also sadness that my relationship with my sister had deteriorated to the point where I was actively participating in a criminal investigation against her. James found me sitting in our kitchen, staring at my coffee without drinking it, lost in thought about how dramatically our lives had changed in just 3 days. "How are you processing all of this?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I keep thinking about something my grandmother used to say," I told him. She'd say that sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their choices, even when it hurts to watch. "That's very wise," James replied, "and very difficult to actually live by when it's your own family." Tuesday brought an unexpected call from Marcus, who sounded exhausted but determined. "Victoria, I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized there were signs I should have noticed earlier." He went on to describe several incidents over the past few months where Natasha had made comments, or taken actions that seemed strange at the time but made more sense in hindsight. She had asked detailed questions about his health insurance benefits, specifically about maternity coverage and family leave policies. She had also mentioned feeling jealous of coworkers who had received attention for major life events like pregnancies and promotions. "The thing that really bothers me," Marcus continued, "is that she was apparently planning this while we were talking about our future together. While I was considering proposing next year, she was plotting to fake a pregnancy. Announcement at your wedding? I'm sorry you're going through this too," I told him honestly. "I know this can't be easy for you either." "Actually, that's part of why I'm calling," he said. "I wanted you to know that if the police or prosecutors need me to testify about anything Natasha told me or any suspicious behavior I witnessed, I'm willing to cooperate fully. What she did to you was wrong, and she needs to be held accountable." His willingness to potentially testify against his former girlfriend, despite their 2-year relationship, reinforced my own decision to pursue criminal charges. If Marcus, who had loved Natasha and planned a future with her, believed she needed to face consequences for her actions, then I was definitely making the right choice. Wednesday brought news that Natasha had been formally charged with identity theft, insurance, fraud, and filing false medical documents. According to Detective Rodriguez, she had turned herself in with her attorney rather than waiting to be arrested, which would be taken into consideration during sentencing if she was convicted. "What happens next?" I asked the detective during our phone call. "There will be a preliminary hearing in about 2 weeks where the charges will be formally read and she'll enter a plea," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Her attorney may try to negotiate a plea bargain, or she may choose to fight the charges and go to trial." That evening, I received the first communication from Natasha since her arrest. It wasn't a phone call or a text message, but a handwritten letter delivered by certified mail to our apartment. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Natasha's familiar handwriting on cream-colored stationery that I recognized from the thank you notes she'd sent after her college graduation. Her words were carefully chosen, acknowledging her poor judgment and desperate actions, while still minimizing the severity of what she had done. "I know you probably can't forgive me right now," she wrote, "but I hope someday you'll understand that I never meant for things to go this far. I was in a dark place emotionally, feeling invisible and unimportant, and I made terrible decisions trying to feel relevant again." The letter ended with a request that felt both desperate and manipulative. "Please consider the impact this will have on our entire family if you proceed with pressing charges. Mom and Dad are already devastated, and sending me to prison won't undo what happened or make anyone feel better." After reading the letter aloud to James, I folded it carefully and placed it in the same folder where I kept all the legal documents related to the case. It would serve as additional evidence of her continued attempts to avoid accountability for her actions. 2 weeks later, James and I sat in the gallery of the county courthouse, watching as Natasha stood before Judge Morrison for her preliminary hearing. She wore a conservative navy blue dress and had styled her hair in a way that made her look younger and more innocent than her 26 years. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s, stood beside her with a stack of papers and an expression of professional confidence. I hadn't seen my sister since she stormed out of our wedding reception, and seeing her now in this sterile courtroom setting felt surreal. This was the same person who used to braid my hair before school, who had stayed up all night with me when our father died, who had helped me pick out my wedding dress just 3 months ago. When the judge read the charges aloud, the severity of what Natasha had done hit me in a new way. Identity theft in the second degree, insurance fraud, filing false medical documents, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Each charge carried potential jail time and significant fines, consequences that could affect her life for years to come. Natasha's attorney entered a plea of not guilty on all counts, which surprised me since I had assumed she might try to negotiate a plea bargain to avoid the publicity of a trial. When the judge asked if she understood the charges against her, Natasha's voice was barely audible as she said, "Yes, Your Honor." During the brief recess that followed, I caught a glimpse of my parents sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom. My mother looked like she had aged 5 years in the past 2 weeks, her usually perfectly styled hair looking limp and her face drawn with stress. My father kept checking his watch and adjusting his tie, obvious signs of the nervous energy that consumed him during difficult situations. They had tried to call me several times since Natasha's arrest, but I hadn't been ready to have conversations about family unity and forgiveness while the legal proceedings were still unfolding. I knew they were struggling with the impossible position of having one daughter who was the victim of a crime and another daughter who was the perpetrator. After the hearing concluded, Detective Rodriguez approached James and me in the courthouse hallway. "The prosecution is moving forward with all charges," she informed us. "Given your sister's not guilty plea, this will likely go to trial unless her attorney decides to negotiate a deal closer to the trial date." "What does that mean for us?" James asked. "Will Victoria need to testify?" "Almost certainly," the detective confirmed. "Your testimony about the unauthorized use of your identity and the impact of her actions will be central to the prosecution's case. We'll also likely call several witnesses from your wedding reception who observed the announcement and subsequent confrontation." The idea of testifying against my own sister in open court felt daunting, but I had committed to seeing this through, to its conclusion. "Whatever you need from me, I'll provide," I told Detective Rodriguez. As we walked toward the courthouse exit, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Marcus hurrying to catch up with us, looking tired but determined. "Victoria, I wanted you to know that I just spoke with the prosecutor. They've asked me to testify about conversations I had with Natasha leading up to the wedding. Are you okay with that?" I asked, knowing how difficult it must be for him to potentially send his former girlfriend to prison. "I am," he said firmly. "She needs to face the consequences of what she did." And honestly, talking to the prosecutor helped me realize that there were more red flags in our relationship than I had admitted to myself. He went on to explain that during their interview, he had remembered several instances where Natasha had been deceptive about smaller things, creating a pattern of behavior that suggested the wedding incident wasn't an isolated event of poor judgment. She lied about being sick to get out of work events she didn't want to attend, Marcus said. She told my parents that she had a gluten allergy to avoid eating foods she didn't like. Then I caught her eating pizza when she thought no one was looking. None of it seemed serious at the time, but now I see it was all part of a pattern of manipulating situations to get what she wanted. That evening, James and I had dinner with Emma and her boyfriend at our favorite Italian restaurant, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy despite everything that was happening with the legal case. Emma had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire ordeal, but I could tell she was still processing the shock of discovering what Natasha was capable of. I keep thinking about all the times she complained about feeling overlooked or underappreciated, Emma said as we shared an appetizer. I always assumed she was just being dramatic, but maybe those feelings were more serious than any of us realized. I've been thinking about that too, I admitted. But feeling overlooked doesn't justify committing crimes, especially against the people who love you most. Absolutely not, Emma agreed quickly. I just meant that maybe there were signs we all missed, that she was struggling emotionally. James reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Even if we had recognized that she was struggling, that doesn't make you responsible for preventing her from making criminal choices. Adults are responsible for their own actions, regardless of their emotional state. As we walked home from dinner that night, I realized that the hardest part of this entire experience wasn't the legal proceedings or the family drama. It was accepting that my sister, the person I had trusted more than almost anyone else in the world, was capable of betraying me so completely, and then refusing to take full responsibility for her actions. Do you think I'm doing the right thing by not trying to reconcile with her before the trial? I asked James as we climbed the stairs to our apartment. I think you're doing exactly what you need to do, he replied. You can't have a genuine reconciliation with someone who isn't genuinely accepting responsibility for what they did wrong. 6 months later, I sat in my home office reviewing the quarterly reports for the nonprofit where I worked, when my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rodriguez. Verdict reached. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing in 2 weeks. The trial had lasted 3 days, during which I had testified for nearly 4 hours about the unauthorized use of my identity and insurance information. Watching my sister sit at the defendant's table while I described her betrayal from the witness stand was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, but I had spoken clearly and honestly about every detail of what she had done. James and I had chosen not to attend the reading of the verdict, deciding that we had participated in the legal process as much as necessary and didn't need to witness Natasha's reaction to being found guilty. Instead, we had spent the morning visiting the farmers market downtown, buying ingredients for a dinner party we were hosting that weekend for friends who had supported us throughout this ordeal. The text from Detective Rodriguez marked the official end of a chapter that had begun on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Natasha would face sentencing in 2 weeks, likely receiving probation and community service for first-time offenses, along with restitution for the medical costs and legal fees her actions had generated. Emma called within an hour of the verdict, having heard the news through our local network of mutual friends. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. "Relieved," I said honestly, surprised by my own emotional clarity. "I'm relieved that the truth was officially recognized and that she was held accountable for what she did." "And how do you feel about Natasha specifically?" Emma pressed. "Are you angry, sad, ready to rebuild your relationship?" I considered her question carefully before answering. "I'm sad about losing the sister I thought I had, but I'm not angry anymore. I think the legal process helped me separate my emotions from the facts of what happened. That weekend, James and I hosted our planned dinner party with 6 friends who had either attended our wedding or supported us through the aftermath. Marcus was among the guests, having remained a close friend despite the awkwardness of our connection through Natasha's crime. As we sat around our dining room table sharing stories and laughter, I realized that this gathering represented something important. These were relationships built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. They were the opposite of the manipulation and deception that had characterized my relationship with Natasha. "You know what I've learned from all this?" I said during a lull in conversation, raising my wine glass slightly. "I've learned that you really do teach people how to treat you." For years, I accepted Natasha's dramatic behavior and small deceptions because I thought that's what family loyalty meant. "And now?" asked my friend Lisa, who had been one of my strongest supporters throughout the legal proceedings. "Now I understand that real love sometimes means setting boundaries that protect both people in the relationship," I replied. If I had confronted her pattern of lying and attention-seeking years ago, maybe she never would have escalated to criminal behavior. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that too. I enabled her dishonesty in small ways because I thought I was being supportive and understanding. But really, I was just teaching her that lies worked." The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful discussions about relationships and accountability that I had ever experienced. Our friends shared their own stories about difficult family dynamics and the challenge of loving people who consistently make harmful choices. 2 weeks later, Natasha was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution for the financial damages her fraud had caused. She was also required to undergo counseling for impulse control and emotional regulation as part of her probation terms. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but Detective Rodriguez called afterward to inform me of the outcome. She also issued a public apology as part of her plea agreement, the detective mentioned. She acknowledged full responsibility for her actions and expressed remorse for the harm she caused. "Did she mention me specifically?" I asked, curious about whether Natasha had finally acknowledged the personal betrayal alongside the legal violations. "She did," Detective Rodriguez confirmed. "She specifically apologized to you and your husband for disrupting your wedding and violating your trust." That evening, I found myself standing in my kitchen where this entire ordeal had begun 6 months earlier, when I first read the medical fraud documents Dr. Martinez had brought to our reception. The woman who had been devastated and confused that night felt like a different person from who I was now. I had learned to trust my instincts about people's behavior rather than making excuses for them. I had discovered that accountability and consequences weren't punishments to be avoided, but necessary elements of healthy relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that protecting myself from harmful behavior wasn't selfish or cruel, but essential for my own well-being and growth. James found me there, lost in thought, and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Grateful that we didn't let her chaos destroy our marriage or our happiness. Grateful that we chose truth over false peace." "And are you ready to move forward?" he asked. "To focus on building our life together without looking back?" "I am," I said, meaning it completely. "I'm ready to focus on the people who choose honesty over drama and accountability over excuses." That night, I deleted Natasha's contact information from my phone and removed our childhood photos from my social media accounts, not out of anger or spite, but because I was finally ready to stop carrying the weight of a relationship that had been built on manipulation and false promises. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's self-destruction, even when that someone is family. 1 year later, James and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary at the same venue where everything had unfolded. The Grandview Manor had offered to host a small renewal ceremony free of charge after the management learned about what had happened at our original reception. They wanted to give us the peaceful celebration we deserved. As we stood in the same spot where Natasha had made her fake announcement, I felt nothing but gratitude. Her betrayal had taught me lessons about boundaries and self-respect that I might never have learned otherwise. The pain had transformed into wisdom, and the chaos had ultimately strengthened our marriage. Marcus attended our anniversary celebration with his new girlfriend, a teacher who valued honesty and kindness over drama and attention. He looked genuinely happy for the first time since I'd known him. During his toast, he said something that perfectly captured what we'd all learned. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you teaches you exactly who deserves to stay in your life. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from Natasha. She had completed her community service and was working as a receptionist while attending therapy twice a week. The letter was different from her previous attempts at contact. No excuses, no manipulation, just a simple acknowledgement that she understood why I had chosen to cut contact and that she hoped someday to become someone worthy of forgiveness. Read the letter once, filed it away, and continued focusing on the relationships that brought joy and authenticity to my life. I had learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and healing doesn't require maintaining toxic connections. The most important lesson from this entire experience? You teach people how to treat you not just through what you accept, but through what you refuse to tolerate. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. If this story resonated with you or helped you think about boundaries in your own life, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.